Getting to the root of an addiction is never easy. But the more you do it, the more you're able to let go of the addiction, let go of that thing you're attaching to, and let the emotions arise. Because, like I've said many times, all addictions are the attempt to suppress and bury painful emotions of unmet needs. Painful emotions of traumatic experiences, painful emotions of traumatic relationships, traumatic seasons of our lives, hard times, painful emotions of loss of people, loss of hopes and dreams. And what I realize is that there's 4 main emotions that seem to be the deepest buried, that really start to arise when I let go of the cravings, I let go of the impulses to reach for something to distract myself. Again, like I've talked about before, I talk about the cage of addiction, whether it be reaching for some version of control, some kind of seeking approval or validation, some kind of instant gratification or thrill seeking, or some kind of dysfunctional enmeshment where you're relying on someone else to regulate your nervous system for you. Letting go of these things, it's counterintuitive to what we're taught by the world, or what we've discovered as a way to cope in a world that does not meet our sacred needs of attunement, authenticity, and Arcadia. In this world where we see that everyone else has developed some sort of coping mechanism, an addiction to the cage, and we learn how to fall in line. And it serves us to numb ourselves and survive as a vulnerable child. As a vulnerable child, we learn to survive. And even as an adult, as long as these patterns continue in our adulthood, it continues to perpetuate this dysfunctional pattern in our relationships. But what I realized as far as the emotions that come up, by being able to sit with it and learn how to self-regulate and develop a strength to my nervous system to be able to calm down, be a master of my breath, and be conscious of how to keep my hormone balance healthy, which all goes into Arcadian needs. There are 4 particular emotions that seem to be the deepestly buried. And there are a lot of other emotions that are piled on top of it. But I learned this through just sitting with myself and attuning with myself, taking a lot of time to just be quiet, sit in silence, sober. It became a lot more clear the more and more sober I became from all of those different cages of addictions. And they are grief, shame, inadequacy, and terror or dread. Terror, dread, inadequacy, also interchangeable with insecurity, shame, and grief. Every time I've sat with these emotions, which just brings back a whole lot of memories, and I think that's just a part of the way we must process it. Eventually, feeling these emotions, like being vulnerable to them, like literally being vulnerable to them, and not trying to numb or run away from them, learning how to sit in them. I've discovered that these are what is driving the behavior of so many people. Whenever you see people acting out, whenever you see people hurting each other, harming each other, or even talking negatively about themselves, all the chaos that you see in the world, in relationships, in the way certain groups are against other groups, it all boils down to these 4 suppressed emotions, which again are not the only 4, but they are deepestly buried. And this is just my model in Soul Symphonics. There's other models that say shame is the lowest vibrational frequency, and there's other models that say fear is the lowest vibrational frequency, but I synthesized all of it. When people say fear is the lowest vibrational frequency, that's what I refer to as dread and terror. Dread and terror is the more extreme versions of it. And why I talk about dread and terror is because any traumatic event that we experience, any traumatic event, the first emotion that we feel is a terror or a dread or some kind of fear. And that's the most extreme. The lighter versions of it, obviously, you can just say a fear or some version of fear, a neurotic anxiety. But that's the first thing that's suppressed. That's already suppressed. But I talk about this in another video where grief is also suppressed. There's so many facets to grief because grief is like a primordial wound of just being born into a physical body where we're separated, where our spirit and soul separates from source or from God and incarnates into a body. This illusion of being separated from source, where we were once unconditional love. We were one with the cosmos. We were one with the universe. We had no distinction between self or other. It was just all one love. And when we're born into this body, we experience this incredibly traumatic world that the modern world and society at large is disconnected from themselves. They're disconnected with each other. They're disconnected from the land, the earth, Arcadia. They're disconnected from our sacred needs. And so there's this grief we're already born into. And this is a primordial grief. Now you layer on top of that a grief of unmet sacred needs, a grief of unmet attunement in a dysfunctional world, modern world, a dysfunctional society. You have the grief of loss. And we're all going to experience some kind of loss in this world. There's a grief of a loss of loved ones, a loss of hopes and dreams. And so there's this grief that is so deep, and we're not taught how to process this. The modern world at large does not know how to process grief. And what I learned through grief is that nobody can run from grief. Nobody can escape grief. Grief, no matter what plans you have in life, no matter what you have planned for the day, if grief decides to surface, if grief decides to show itself and you're sober enough to really feel it, obviously some people will keep numbing themselves constantly, numbing, getting high, stacking highs, doing this, doing that, stuck to the cage of addiction, so they don't ever have to feel that grief. But grief, make no mistake, will derail you from anything you have planned. Whatever you have planned for your life, whatever you have planned for your day, if grief decides to reveal itself and poke its head out, you're going to get derailed. And that's why so many people are clinging to some sort of substance, control, approval, enmeshment to feel safe and to numb that pain, because the pain is so great. If you go into metaphysics, this grief doesn't just begin with us. This grief goes back into our lineage. It goes back into our ancestry. It goes back to the grief of our ancestors who also did not know how to process grief. If you go into the history of colonialism and genocide and cultural erasure, all of that grief that our ancestors experienced is still imprinted in the metaphysical realm. In epigenetics, there's a field called epigenetics. If you're not familiar with it, you can read a book called Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. It's an incredible book, but this is a field that really explores epigenetics and how there are codes or there's genetic information that is passed down onto us. Another book is It Didn't Start With You or It Didn't Begin With You. No, I think It Didn't Start With You. But there's a whole lot of research that shows how trauma from the Holocaust survivors have affected generations after those survivors in the way their biology expresses itself. There are more dysfunctions. There is an interruption in the DNA coding. And people who are very much just caught up in the body may find this hard to believe. They may find it hard to grasp, hard to understand. But the wounds of our ancestors are being expressed through our lives. So we can change it. We can heal it because we are now the ones carrying the frontier of the bloodline. We are the ones responsible for continuing and growing the bloodline, the lineage. So that responsibility to resolve this past hurt, this past trauma, all this suppressed emotion is up to us. But today, man, I just feeling a whole lot of grief. And it's not just my grief. I'm aware of that. I currently know quite a few people who have recently lost loved ones. And I've lost my pops due to cancer. So it does bring some of that up, but also some of the grief that I'm feeling right now that I'm able to sit with and I'm able to reflect on it and study it. And that's kind of how I learn a lot of this too, is I'm literally just sitting in it sober, objectively, open-minded, with an open heart, and just studying it, studying the feeling, as uncomfortable as it is. But I've been feeling grief of unmet sacred needs, a grief of misattunement from my childhood and from past relationships. I'm feeling the grief of hopes and dreams that are dying right now, hopes and dreams of people that I guess I had high hopes for, but the reality of people is awakening me to see that people are where they are, and everyone is dealing with grief in their own way. Everyone's dealing with shame in their own way. And for me, the way I've been processing it is a lot of journaling, but I've also learned to channel it. I've been learning to channel all of these emotions into my dream for my life, what I call my one love, or other people might say my why. But I've been channeling it into so many passion projects. And I was talking to my cousin about this the other day because he was dealing with a lot of grief, and I know a lot of the grief I'm feeling right now, I'm also carrying that load. My other friend just lost his cousin as well, and I know I'm carrying that load as well. I'm not carrying it to keep carrying it, but I'm carrying it to transmute it. as a human being and connecting with people that you love, you share the burden. You share the emotional burden, right? And for me, learning how to channel these emotions into these creative passion projects has been a tremendous source of fuel. And David Icke talks about our emotional content as loosh, our creative power. So when I talk about emotions as creative power, I'm not saying emotions alone is what creates in the world. It's just like, it's like the fuel for creation. If you think about all of the movies where there's such tragic loss, like all the Rocky movies, all the fighting movies, Southpaw, there's such a tremendous loss and such tremendous emotion behind it. And when they learn to stop clinging to the cage of addiction, you know, substances, alcohol, control, etc., and they learn how to channel it into a clear, intentional goal for their life that is aimed at their ideal dream for health, wealth, love, and fulfillment in their life. When your emotions is channeled toward that in a creative endeavor, there is so much that you're able to let go and process. And also, Bruce Lee talks about this. I know most people don't really remember this part, but there is a part in Enter the Dragon when Bruce Lee, in the beginning of Enter the Dragon, is teaching a young student how to kick, or basically how to spar and interact in that fight exchange. And he tells the kid to throw a kick. The kid throws a kick. And then Bruce Lee's like, what was that? An exhibition? Now try again. But eventually, Bruce Lee gets to the point and he says, emotional content. He wants the kid to pour in some emotional content. And then the kid starts tapping into a little bit of like frustration and anger, not to the point where it's dysregulating the kid. And that is a key, very key nuance to understand. The kid is tapping into this emotional battery bank that he has. And he starts dancing with Bruce Lee, and he throws a kick with a lot more power. And Bruce Lee's like, that's it. That's it. And what he's talking about is exactly what I'm talking about. How it's our emotional content. It's the same thing that David Icke talks about, how this is our loosh, this is our creative power. And this is the same thing that all of the addictions are siphoning and hemorrhaging from us, and that we're not aware of. It's either causing us to fully just go accelerate entropy by having no boundaries and just letting our emotions leak all over the place like a complainer who's stuck in victimhood, or entropy through constriction and suppression where you're bottling it up. Either way, both of those, there's not an optimal flow of the emotion. And I talk a lot about this in Soul Symphonics, is the principle and law of entropy and syntropy, which can be overlaid across all the terrains in Soul Symphonics, in which I will be discussing a lot more later. Entropy in Soul Symphonics, a quick definition, is the loss of optimal flow and function of energy within any given ecosystem. And that loss can occur through either chaos or a lack of boundaries and structure, or too rigid of a structure, too constrictive of a structure. Now, syntropy is the opposite. Syntropy is the optimal flow and function of energy within any given ecosystem. So syntropy is kind of like that Goldilocks zone. There is just enough boundaries and structure for it to flow, but it's not so rigid where it constricts flow. And also, it's not so chaotic with a lack of boundaries where energy is just being scattered and diffused all over the place. So syntropy, there is a Goldilocks zone. It's not too much, not too little boundaries, and it is just the right amount to create the perfect flow. To understand how to channel your emotions, you have to develop just the right amount of boundaries and understand where you may be leaking energy, or where your emotions may just be hemorrhaging all over the place, or where your emotions are being bottled up. So it goes back to these 4 hidden horsemen. I call them the 4 hidden horsemen: dread/terror, shame, grief, and inadequacy. These are the 4 that are causing most of the dysfunctional, that are driving the most dysfunctional behavior between people and their relationships with self, others, and all. In the Gottman Institute, which is an institute developed by John and Julie Gottman, who are renowned relationship and love therapists/scientists and psychologists, they talk about what they call the 4 horsemen in relationship. The 4 horsemen in relationship, they say, appears when a relationship is beginning to break down. In other words, it's when the relationship is becoming toxic and unhealthy. And these 4 characteristics of the 4 horsemen in relationship, according to the Gottmans, are stonewalling, defensiveness, criticism, and contempt. Anytime these 4 are showing up in relationship, it's a clear indicator that the relationship is going south. Or if it began on that note, that the relationship is already a very toxic, dysfunctional relationship. Now, to go deeper, tying in my model in Soul Symphonics of the 4 hidden horsemen with terror/grief, terror/dread, grief, shame, and inadequacy. These are the 4 hidden horsemen. These 4 are animating the 4 horsemen in the relationship. And these are the 4 that are most suppressed through addictions. These are the 4 that are most suppressed through the cage of control, seeking approval, instant gratification, thrill seeking, dysfunctional enmeshment. So it's really important that understanding, by tapping into your creative side, we are all creative human beings. We all have a creative potential. We are creating our lives each day. It doesn't mean you have to be labeled an artist. It doesn't mean you have to be labeled a painter. We are all creators. People are creating their lives. You're creating health. You're creating relationships. You're creating career paths for you. You are creating your dreams. You're creating whatever it is in your life. You're creating destruction. You're creating disease. We are creators. Tapping into this creative side of us, we have to understand the role that these emotions play and how to channel them, so we are creating syntropy with them. So we are directing it into what we want to create in our life. But we have to become conscious of it. As long as we are still ruled by our subconscious complexes of the 4 hidden horsemen, or the 4 horsemen in a relationship, as long as that's a reaction in our everyday lives, we'll never be able to become consciously aware of how to create something new, how to make a new choice. So a lot of Soul Symphonics has to do with me making you aware, making you conscious of these deeper metaphysical aspects of our lives, of emotional intelligence that most people don't talk about, and social intelligence that most people don't talk about, in order for us to truly channel what is suppressed into creating what we truly desire, our soul truly desires for our highest expression. Because let's face it, deep down, whether we're in denial or not, our soul wants to live a joyful life. It wants to live a fulfilling life. It wants to experience life in a healthy, vital body. It wants to experience safety in relationships. It wants to enjoy. And that's deep. And some of us have been so damaged, and I get it. I really get it. Some of us have been so wounded and so programmed to where we truly believe we are inadequate, we are shameful, we are less than, and we don't deserve a beautiful life, we don't deserve the good life, we don't deserve health. But underneath all that, underneath all the wounds, the soul truly just wants to be free.